Welcome to the Data Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We have the session here every Friday to allow you, the audience, to ask questions about data vaults, cloud computing, data mining, any data-driven applications, MVP clusters here, anything you want, as long as it's data-driven, more or less. And yeah, you can use the chat here, the chat function in the client to raise a question in live during the session. You can use the Q&A function in the chat or in this client. You can also raise your hand. I would give you a voice. And I'll also show you a link to a form after today's session where you can submit your questions. And then they would give me some prep time to create some short slide, essentially. I'm not spending too much time on it, to be honest. So you can also raise questions in live. If you receive multiple questions, we will be cherry picking. If there's no questions at all, I will talk about the cluster. I haven't done anything. So longer story short, it becomes a running joke at the moment. That's what it is. We have a question. Let me just show it to you. Thanks, guys, that you're sending in questions, because otherwise I have to talk about the cluster. This question is essentially an extension to the ones that we discussed already for the last 2 weeks, more or less. Here, let me just read this and then I'll explain my understanding of the question here. So we have to integrate a second system with our existing non-historized link that can update the transaction for the last 2 months, previous months, if not closed yet, and the current month. This would obviously need a satellite to track updates of amounts. If the immutable system used non-historized link, then would we define another link for this type of system and federate data only in business vault information mode. So they got 2 systems where they receive transactions, booking transactions in a bank, for example. So they receive two sets of transactions from 2 different systems. And in the end, in your information map, you would like to have one fact entity where all these transactions are essentially end up in, and you can aggregate across those 2 systems, essentially. That's the basic idea. Now, let's talk about a couple of issues here, or a couple of topics here. And let's start with the federation itself. So typically, a hub and a link, unlike satellites, hubs and links are sourced from often sourced from multiple source systems. I mean, the idea of the hub is to integrate across source systems. That means the business keys come from different source systems. Same is true more or less for links. If you have the same relationship semantically, right? Semantically, granularity-wise, if you have the same relationship in multiple source systems, you can load this. You can load a link from multiple source systems, essentially, right? It's a distinct list of all the relationships across all your source systems, just like the hub is a distinct list of all the business keys across all your source systems. Satellites are different. Satellites, we create one satellite per source, right? We never mix 2 different source systems. I said different, 2 different source systems into one satellite. There are some exceptions when you have multi-tenant systems or IoT data. An IT sensor is a source system, and you have millions of those, right? You don't want to create millions of satellites, but that's a general idea. So one satellite per source, and one hub and link across all sources, typically, if it's the same data. And the same is true for the non-historized link. So you can source a non-historized link from multiple source systems. That's number 1. If we talk about the same granularity, the same semantic meaning, if both systems provide you the same type of booking transactions, if there's no difference in semantics or in granularity, you can load them into the same link structure. You might need to separate them by some additional elements, maybe some source identifier or tenant, if there's an potential overlap of identifiers or something, right? But that's what we do. So we would load this in the raw data vault into the same non-historized link. Then for the satellites, a non-historized link typically stores only inserts, right? Because a fact can never change in theory. We talk about practice in a second. But in theory, a fact can never change. Like a real-time message, like a booking transaction in a bank should never change, right? I'm smiling because the reality is a bit different. So the purpose of the satellite attached to a non-historized link is not by default, is not to capture changes. It's actually to separate those attributes which we don't need necessarily for the ordinary casual user, for the casual user, I should say. Those attributes we don't need for a casual user when they just want to aggregate some data. So, yeah, so let me just draw this up again. Quickly. So what you have is a whiteboard. There you go. Ah, come on. Time for still a copy. Okay. So we have essentially the non-historized link for your transactions. I should stay here. So we have this non-historized link for transactions, and that's where we keep all the identifying elements, like the hub references, the TID as we call it, the transaction identifier element. So we have, let's say, accounts hub. That's the reference, not the hub, right? It's a hub reference to account. Come on, you get it. There you go. I believe it doesn't matter. So then we have the hub for account customer, let's say. And potentially, let's say, some transaction identifier, we like to call this TID, which we just denormalize into the link structure. That gives us the alternate key. I don't like this whiteboard in Zoom anymore. That's the alternate key. And yeah, you have the hash key across this alternate key. That's your hash key for the link itself. So there's a HK for the link edit as well. That's your PK, more or less, yeah. So I left some space at the end, yeah, right? So there's some space here on purpose. So what we add to the link structure are all those attributes where the casual user wants to aggregate on, like the amount values. Typically, you want to group by some dimension member or some dimension, and you want to aggregate some amount. So and keep this amount here. That's my measure essentially. So I would add this to the non-historized link, because what I want to avoid is I have the satellite down here, and in this satellite I have this hash key. I have a load date, but the primary key is actually only the hash key, at least logically wise. So we have the PK here, and that is out of the load date is out of the primary key. So it only allows one delta per transaction, essentially. No changes, right? And then you have attributes. I don't know, all kinds of line descriptions and so on, where no typical user wants to aggregate on, right? They don't aggregate on line descriptions. And that would make the link structure too wide, essentially. So we keep it off the link structure to keep the link structure a bit thinner, able to press more data records into a page, assuming row level, a row storage, essentially, right? Row-based storage. It's another story. So, but that's at least for a starting point for a discussion. Now, if you have changes, the problem is it would be easy if the change only affects your attribute in a satellite. Then you just add the load date to the primary key, make this a standard satellite, not a non-historized satellite, and then the satellite allows deltas, and you just capture them. Done. But the problem is if the change affects the amount or one of the hub references. It wasn't this customer, it was another customer. So let's update the transaction, right? And that turns into a new hub reference in a link. In this case, you got a problem because you can't update the amount value here. We want to do insert only incremental loads. The trick now is that when your second source okay, next time I go for the legacy whiteboard again. So we can do this here essentially. We can load this from two systems, right? So there would be two satellites, but one link where you capture both granularities from the transactions. Essentially, that's all clear. The problem is the change, and a change we don't want to capture in a satellite because the amount should be in a link structure. So what we do instead is we insert technical counter transactions, and we have those some webinars on this already, some Data Vault recordings, Data Vault Friday recordings. The idea is the first transaction, let's say, a transaction. So I always make this example: a customer account, and then some amount, and you have the LDTS. When did you receive LDT? Come on, S, and a transaction date. So the idea is that we add extra space. So customer A, amount, the account X, amount €5, day one. So when there's a change, and I'll just do it quick because there's enough recordings, I believe, a couple of recordings already on this topic. so when there's a change, what you do is instead of inserting a delta, let's say you want to change the amount from 5 to 7 euros, don't insert 2. Always get rid of the old fact and insert the new fact. It's easier to load in the end. And that's what I don't explain here today. It's in the recordings. So what you do is you get rid of the old fact into the new fact. So AX minus 5, day 1. Sorry, on day 2, I recognize this change, right? So the first day, there was a change. And this is still a transaction from day 1. And into the new fact, AX. Oh, come on, whiteboard. 7, day 2, day 1. And I have a counter column here, or X or whatever. And here I'm indicating if the record came from the source system, 1, or if it's a technical counter transaction, -1. And if you aggregate all this, you will get 7 euros here for customer. So this is my sum. So AX 7. Yeah, the latest day would be the knowledge on day 2. So that's the aggregation here, right? So I make 2 lines down here to make it clear. And then we have the transaction on day 1. And this is 1 in total. That's why we know there's 1 transaction left, essentially. Behind all these records, those 3 records or more, when you have more changes, behind all these records, there's 1 transaction. So we know this transaction still exists. That's what the purpose of the counter column is. 0 means the record has been deleted. When you delete the record and don't introduce a new one, it's a deletion, essentially, in the source system. So that's how we capture this. Yeah, and that's unrelated to having multiple source systems. So you could have one source system that's inserting only, right? So it's all good. So just inserting the first row here. And then you have another system that has updates sometimes, once in a while, in the last 2 months. And then in this case, you would insert these technical counter transactions to the link structure if the change affects the data inside the link. Be aware it will also affect in the non-historized link because the thing is, in this link structure, the hash value will change. It must change, right? It's a primary key. Yeah. Or the alternative would be to add the load date to the primary key. So depending on what you use, you either have the primary key, the load date in a satellite structure as well, turning it into a start link, or you have a new hash key and that leads to a new satellite delta with every change, one way or the other. Both works in the end. So, but that's how we deal with it. And it doesn't matter if there's 1 system or 2 systems loading to the non-historized link. If 1 system is changing, add those technical counter transactions, as we call them, and check out our YouTube channel where you find those recordings with, I believe, dealing with changing transactions or something. Or you'll find, if you search for non-historized links, you'll find, I believe, a couple of recordings. And then one of those is how to deal with these technical counter transactions in a non-historized link, essentially, where we discuss the loading and so on. That's the idea. So good idea to check out the YouTube channel. All right, so good question here. Let me just find my slides here again. And sorry for the whiteboard. Make sure next time I use the old whiteboard again. Okay, so yeah, if you have a question like this, good question, send it in. There's a link here, sfr.ee/dbfriday. That's where a form is behind this link where you can essentially submit your question, maybe upload some pictures if you want from a team, from a whiteboard, everything else. We upload what you send. We don't necessarily present here. If it's good, we present here. And we have 2 more webinars, one on WhereScape, one on DBT. That's not for me. I'm not a tool expert. So go to scalefree.to/webinars, sorry. And that's where you find essentially the registration links for those webinars, which happen once a month by tool experts at Scalefree, essentially. And if you can't wait until next Friday, there's a data innovators exchange. That's a forum style community where you can ask questions essentially as well. There's a competition going on between Ignition Data and Scalefree, the 2 founding members essentially of this community, where we answer these questions as quick as possible essentially. So that's maybe the quick session. We need more questions here for the Data Friday as well. So if you don't want me talking about the MPP class, then I have nothing. As I have no progress for the last 2 years. It's turned off, right? So it's just weight in the basement. That's it. Not consuming any power. The thing that's running, that's the NAS. That's okay. But so it's not consuming any storage power, but it's just sitting here for fun. That's it. Ask questions, please, because otherwise I'm screwed. All right, cool. Thanks for joining today. See you next Friday. And yeah, submit your questions, guys. Thank you, guys. Thanks.